We often treat these things as binary, going, well, it was never affordable. Yeah, but I mean, there's different levels of unaffordable.
And we used to have areas in Toronto, for example, that artists could afford to live in. Now, I don't think there's anywhere in Toronto that artists can afford to live at this point.
I think economists are way meaner to each other than even journalists are. So I think we're more mean to each other, in the newsroom, and you guys are like, you're the dumbest person I ever met.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Meredith Martin.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And we asked you for your questions, and you responded with so many great ones. And so many that this is actually our second Ask Me Anything episode. Happy New Year!
But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Our producer, Meredith Martin, is flying the plane this week. She'll be reading some of the questions we've been getting from you listeners, and one thing to note, most of them have been edited for clarity and for length.
The first question goes to Cara, and it's from Devin Burns. I have been swayed by your podcast over the last year or so. What can you do to encourage my city to follow some, or any, of your recommendations?
The main thing is speak to your politicians, volunteer for the ones who are actually going to act to make a difference, and try to convince people who are in ridings that are really important to the government, particularly those in suburban ridings. Try to convince them to care about this. I think it's important to talk to your friends and family who maybe they're comfortably housed and they don't think that this is a big problem, or they don't see how detrimental this is for our province. I think getting them to acknowledge it so that it becomes something that the majority care about is what'll make a difference. So, and I think that you have the best chance of convincing people if you talk to them on a personal level.
The next one goes to Mike. It's from Ian Gibson, and he sent us another good question. Would Ontario be better served by standardized zoning and building forms across the province? Is it technically and legally possible? Is it even politically feasible?
Well, to the first question, this is a great question. Is it technically and legally possible? Absolutely. As the term often goes that municipalities are creatures of the province. So the province can absolutely set some kind of zoning law or regulation that all municipalities or even some municipalities need to abide by. So it is absolutely possible. I think it's a great idea. I think one of the issues that we have in building homes, particularly in getting more automation in home building, more factory built housing or panelization or things like that, is that lack of standardization. One example I use is imagine what our automotive industry would look like if cars sold in the city of Mississauga had to have their gas tank door on the driver's side. Those in Brampton had to be on the passenger side, and those in Caledon had to be behind the bumper. Right, you would never get economies of scale for any car that you were building, but that's exactly how we treat home building through zoning and even kind of bespoke other regulations at the municipal level. So, absolutely, I think the challenge is the political one. That municipal politicians don't want to give up that control, but I think if this goes back to the first question, I think if people are demanding it, if people are sort of tired of municipalities coding everything and tying everything up in red tape, they can absolutely demand this from the province. So I do think it can be overcome, but I do think that Ian's correctly identified that the issues are political feasibility.
Great. To Cara, from Drew Hubley from Halifax. One of the major issues with housing here is the ability to get to and from work efficiently. Halifax is a peninsula, so the land here is highly valued because getting to and from downtown is such a pain if you live off the peninsula. Would enhanced transit improve housing affordability by expanding the amount of available land for housing developments?
For sure. Like that makes a huge difference. The more places you have that you can build where people actually can live and get to their jobs, the better it is. We know that neighborhoods are desirable, as you said, is if they are in places where you can easily reach the jobs. And I do think we could solve our housing crisis if we built more transit. We talked to not just Bikes Jason Slaughter a little while ago, and he was talking about how in lots of places they build transit and then they let growth happen around that transit, and that's not something we tend to do in Canada all that much. And so you end up with the most desirable homes being established around where transit lines already exist. And I think that's why we need a lot more investment in public transit. And also, like, I think about something like high speed rail is something that I'm like really hopeful that we'll see one day in our future. I have no idea if it's actually going to happen. I know that Mike is very pessimistic about it, and I can't help but be an optimist and say that maybe it'll happen one day. But if we could have more land where people can get to work in a reasonable amount of time, of course, that would make a huge difference in housing prices because you would just open up more areas for building. And just as a quick side note, I know that Halifax is actually restricted by the geography. This is the argument a lot of people have against the Greenbelt in Ontario, where we actually do have that land available, but we have artificially kind of landlocked ourselves in, and that's why density is so important in those areas. And anywhere that is actually kind of forced to be smaller than it otherwise would, like in Halifax, we really need to focus on upzoning so that we can get density into those areas where people need to live in order to get to work.
Yeah, I'd add a caveat to that. Like, let's say in an imaginary world, we were able to build high speed rail between Toronto and Owen Sound. Let's say, as an example. So yeah, more people would move to Owen Sound and kind of commute to Toronto to work. Well, what would happen there is, yes, that would ease the price pressures on Toronto, but prices in Owen Sound would go way, way up compared to what they are now. So it doesn't so much make things necessarily on average cheaper, but what it does do is get rid of some of that differential you see between places. But I think ultimately we have to deal with the land issues, zoning, building code, and so on, because you have places like Tillsonburg. They don't have great transit. They don't have any kind of geographic limitations on building, and homes there are still hideously expensive. So yes, I mean, it would absolutely. Transit would give people more options, and I think that in and of itself is valuable. But I think the bigger issue it would have, as long as you don't deal with all those other kind of land use and building issues, is that it would kind of compress prices. So kind of Toronto would go down in price, Owen Sound or wherever would go up. Average, might go up, might go down a little bit, but yeah, you would lose that what we call a location premium.
To Mike from David Tucker, why has panelized construction not been more widely adopted here?
So that's a great question. And partly it actually goes to the answer I gave a couple of questions ago of that sort of lack of standardization. So doing things like wall panels and so on are really helpful if you're doing kind of repeatable builds all over the place, because then you can just go, okay, I'm going to build this wall in a factory and use it all over the place. But we don't have that because of, all kinds of different rules and regulations and standards and lot width and what have you. But the second thing is in North America, we've had this trend since the end of World War II, where we'll have a housing boom and there'll be all these great startups in either panelization, full modular home, all of these technologies, like kind of factory built approaches. And then once there's kind of a lull in home building, a recession or something like that, they don't make it through to the other side, right? They can't get the business to continue operating because these factories are expensive. It's not like having traditional home building where you basically say, okay, it's going to be a lean couple of years. We'll lay off all of our tradespeople, run kind of a skeleton crew, and then when things come back up, we'll just hire them all back. You can't do that with a factory and robots and equipment and machinery, right? This has a lot of month-to-month expenses you can't get rid of. So that tends to be the cycle here. And I think there are smart public policy ways to deal with that, right? You could have the government as the kind of buyer of last resort, saying, okay, you know what, whenever there's a recession, government will step in, will buy some of this stuff for use for social housing and things like that. So there are ways around this, but in Canada and the United States, we've never really used those creative policy levers. And what's happened every single time, we have a lot of great housing startups, then we have a recession, and not many of them make it out to the other side.
This one's from Jeremy Bird. I took Economics 101 at Western in 2011. I was taught that allowing rents to rise will result in people renting rooms in their own homes, which will in turn stabilize rents. Canada has thousands of empty nesters living in huge homes. It's legal to build granny flats in many of them, but it still isn't happening. What needs to happen to change this?
I think that a lot of people would see sharing their living space as a downgrade in their quality of life. So if rent is high, like there's a point where people will, but most people would not choose this option if they have any other option. And homeowners, especially people who bought a long time ago, who are often the people who have those empty bedrooms, they have huge amounts of equity, which gives them lots of options that they can choose before they choose to take in a roommate. And so you see stories every once in a while where that happens, but I don't see that happening on a massive scale, because I think people will choose to find out if they're able to take money out of their home or borrow from their home before that they would do that. And then the second part of that you asked about is granny flats. And it's really expensive to build one. Even though we have the opportunity to build, let's say, garden suites or laneway suites, or there's other versions of this, I think a lot of people would do that if it was financially feasible. But you look at just the development charges alone and the taxes you're going to pay to do that, it's prohibitively expensive for most people. I don't think the average person is going to be able to afford that. And if they can, they might look at other options first. So I think that we're not reaching a point where we'll see that at a massive scale, especially when you have that kind of wealth inequality where the people who have the homes aren't necessarily struggling the same way.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. The first of all, we actually don't know the extent to whether or not any of this is happening, because our data is so terrible. And this is an issue that comes up a lot, where we'll hear well, why is this not happening, or why is this happening? So why aren't we getting more people renting out rooms, or why are hedge funds buying up all the homes? And we're like, well, we actually don't know the extent to which either of those are true or not true, right? Because of data issues. But I'd also point out, at least here in Ontario, go to the granny suite thing, that, I mean, our landlord tenant board is absolutely broken, right? If you get a bad tenant, you are in for a world of hurt. And, you're a 78-year-old widowed woman. You don't want to deal with that. You don't want to deal with, again, maybe renting out a room to a 22-year-old student. There are all kinds of safety risks and financial risks and things like that. That a lot of, seniors, they spent their lives working hard so they could enjoy their retirement, right? They don't want to have to deal with more crap. And when you have these systems that are completely broken, yeah, that's not surprising. They're just going to say it's not worth it. It's not worth the risk.
Do we need to change Economics 101? Because I feel like this was something I learned in high school economics. And if you're using examples where things just aren't necessarily panning out in real life, is this, just a lack of data? How would you even measure this? Who would be able to tell us these numbers? Is there any jurisdiction that actually counts this?
Well, I would actually say the opposite. I think we need to stop invoking Economics 101. I don't recall this example ever being in any kind of textbook, right? But whenever there's something that people can't explain, they invoke the specter of Economics 101. And that's not to suggest that we get the curricula perfectly right in first year, but I find it this kind of hammer where it's oh, okay, well, we can't immediately explain some economic phenomenon, therefore our principles classes are broken. But we also sort of recognize in Economics 101 that there's this thing called elasticity, right? And not all responses to a price change are equal, right? That demand and supply have certain levels of sensitivity, and they're different for different goods and different services. So yeah, I think it is a combination of a data thing. And again, I think a lot of it is just people kind of invoking the specter of economics 101 when there's some phenomenon they can't immediately explain.
So I guess this person who wrote in and they said that they went to Western, I was like, was this Economics 101 course taught by Mike? But I guess probably
It
not
was
if you
not.
don't remember this example.
So I don't teach on main campus, and I don't teach first year. But yeah, so if they ask a question about fourth year economics for managers, then yeah, over at Ivy, yeah, that might be me. But yeah, I don't teach
Ivy.
principles. Ooh, Ivy, yeah.
Okay, the next one is from Cameron Climby, and it's to Mike. Which major Canadian city, 250,000 people or more, is doing the best job of improving housing affordability, and how? And because it's very obviously not going to be an Ontario city, which major Ontario city is doing the best?
Yeah, I have thoughts on this one. I would say, and we did a report. I think we did an episode about it a few weeks ago where we looked at which cities have performed the best over the last 6 years. And I think we had Burnaby as number one. So though I guess technically they're not 250,000, or maybe they are. I'm not sure. They're right around that line. Anyhow, I would actually point to a different city, though. I would actually look at Edmonton, which never had prices kind of go through the roof, at least not in the last 20 years or so. But I think that's actually in some sense more important to not let affordability get out of hand in the first place. So they're doing a lot of great things in Edmonton, including a system for automated permit approvals. So if you are a developer, you can go to the city. If you fill out your paperwork, it can basically get assessed by computer and not by a person, and something that might take several weeks here is less than 24 hours there. So I'd look at Edmonton. I think they're doing a great job and have been for a while. In Ontario, who's doing well, who's not doing well? I'm going to give a very controversial answer here. I think Toronto's doing all right. I think they're at least trying things. I don't love everything that they're doing. But they're trying to get more gentle density. They're trying things on zoning. Their development charges, while way too high, are actually lower than large portions of the 905. So I'd give them a shout out. Both Vaughan and Burlington in 2024 lowered development charges. Still way too high, but yeah, for the first time they're actually going in a good direction. So I'll give them a shout out. London has done well with legalizing, at least in parts of towns, legalizing 4-story stacked townhouses. So they're trying some things. St. Thomas, Ontario, just south of London. Now we're getting much smaller than 250,000. They've been punching above their weight when it comes to building, when it comes to approval times and so on. So there are good news stories in Ontario. It's not enough, but we are seeing some municipalities really trying to raise their game.
Awesome. This is from Michelle Champagne. Canada is not affordable for artists. Was it ever? Can you give advice to people who think their talents may be best suited for jobs that aren't lucrative, like those in the arts?
It's really hard because I think that the arts is one of those fields where it's like a lot of people don't make very much money in it, of course. And so it's always kind of been difficult for people to make a living in the arts. Even when there were more affordable homes, you still had, it was still much more challenging for artists than people in other areas. We talk about like that starving artist trope, and it is based in reality. And we used to have areas in Toronto, for example, that artists could afford to live in. Now, like, I don't think there's anywhere in Toronto an artist can afford to live at this point. And so it's just kind of changing where artists can live. They're having to move further and further out from cities. I remember booking at the agenda, I had the musicians Tegan and Sarah on, and we were in the green room. And so, of course, because it was me, we ended up talking about housing, and they were talking a lot about how you had to always move to cheaper areas, that as when they decided to be musicians, they knew that they were not going to be able to afford to live in fancy places until they made it big. And that was a case then. And so I remember Sarah saying, well, that's like, I don't know why we're worrying about this. That has always happened. So if people have to move to Hamilton at the time, I think is where we heard a lot of artists moving to. Now it's probably even further out. That was just normal. And so maybe that's like, people find a way to make it work. The change is, of course, how far they are. And that's obviously a problem when you need like a lot of like community support in your life, in the arts, and in lots of jobs that are the kind of jobs that people just feel like very grateful to be in. I complain about this with journalism, that you end up having a lot of people who have parental support, who have financial stability through that, people who can support them as they chase those passions. That's who can go into it. And like, it's a problem in journalism. I suspect it's a problem in the arts if you can only have a bunch of trust fund kids who are able to really make a go of it. So it's a bigger struggle than just in that field, but it's a real issue for sure.
Yeah, and I think, one of the challenges here is that we often treat these things as binary, going, well, it was never affordable. Yeah, but I mean, there's different levels of unaffordable, right? And, we have to look at that, I think it has got objectively worse. So let's go back to the 90s when Jason Slaughter of Not Just Bikes and I were in high school together. We graduated in the mid 90s. Some of our classmates, because our high school had a very, very strong drama program, after high school went to Toronto and went into the arts. And I'm not going to suggest for a moment that any of them had an easy time, that, they had to live in places that weren't great and they were really kind of struggling to get by. But it was possible that you could make a few $100s go a long way. You can't do that anymore. And Cara's absolutely right that the only people doing it now are the kind of trust fund kids who are able to live without earning much income because they get a lot of support from their parents. And that becomes a problem because we no longer become a meritocracy at that point, right? It becomes your success in life becomes more and more dependent on who your parents are, their financial levels, and how much they are or aren't willing to support you, rather than based on your innate talents.
I agree. When I graduated in the 90s, you could make a living being a graphic artist, which meant for the friends I had who went into that, they were, talented illustrators. They also, were struggling to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. And so they went to college and got degrees in illustration or in graphic arts, and you could really make a living doing that. And I think that's becoming harder and harder and harder because it just doesn't pay that well. And rents are so high. So it's interesting to me, the people who are almost in like art adjacent industries who could figure out a way to take their talent and turn it into a living. I think that's becoming more and more out of reach for many people. It's quite depressing, frankly. The next question is from Joseph. It goes to Mike. As someone who was recently fortunate enough to buy a home in Toronto, I have land transfer tax on the brain. Does the land transfer tax make any sense? It seems like adding tens of thousands of dollars to buying a home only hurts affordability and makes downsizing less desirable.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I think, why we have this thing in the first place is that provinces, or in case municipalities, it's kind of a weird way of trying to backdoor in a capital gains tax for primary residences, where it's like, okay, you can't do that. That's unpopular, but we'll do this other thing that will, assess this tax that is, based on the value of the home. And it's not a property tax in the sense that, it's based on some kind of theoretical value. It's actually, at a purchase price at a particular point in time. So yeah, it's a way for provincial governments and in some cases municipal governments to try and capture the value of escalating home prices. But no, I don't think it's a great tax because it makes unaffordable homes even more unaffordable. And frankly, I also think it gives the wrong incentives to cities because they actually benefit when homes get more expensive. So I think it kind of encourages them to, unfortunately, keep homes expensive and keep transactions high because that is a source of revenue. But yeah, I think it is a particularly harmful tax, and I would like to see it go.
This is for both of you from Lambert and Shrink. What is your best guess as to where prices will go in the next 2 years? Should people think about buying today or buy in a year or two? This is a question that, neither Mike nor Cara are experts in or financial advisors, so they can't really answer that from that perspective. But I think it's an important question to ask because it's literally anybody who's thinking about getting into the housing market is like, should I go now or should I wait? And I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on like how you balance those two things.
I had to make that decision a couple of years ago when I bought my home. And I think that what I did was I looked at like, can I afford this home right now? Is it somewhere I can stay in the long term, even if prices don't go up? Like I know that there's some people who expect that their home will increase in value within a short period of time. I'm like, okay, well, if it stayed the same for 10 years, would I be able to be happy here? Can I afford it? I know there's a lot of people who keep waiting for prices to come down. And I always hear stories about people who were looking at it, back in the early 2000s and going, oh, it's going crazy. I should just wait it out. And that might not ever happen. And I don't see any major changes in the next few years that make me think that housing is going to come down significantly. It's possible. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what will happen in the economics. I don't know what will happen in interest rates. So we just don't know, especially if you're buying a freehold home, a townhouse, a semi-detached, a detached, when I'm looking at in Toronto or the GTA or any of these places that have really gone up in recent years and are seeing massive amounts of population growth, I just don't see a situation where it's going to be worth less than it currently is in 10 years or so. And so when I think about that and the cost of me buying it and building the equity over that time instead of paying the rent and having that stability, to me, that was worth it. But I really think you have to consider that home prices hopefully won't see the same kind of gains that they'd seen in the last 20 years. And so you just have to, as soon as you see a house that you like, that you're happy in, that you think you could spend a long time in, I think that's when it makes sense to buy.
Yeah, just the trying to time the market is a bit of a fool's game. And in the Christmas episode, I kind of answered this, at least for the GTA, where I said that I am worried that we're going to lull ourselves into a false sense of security because the next 12 to 18 months, might not be good economically. We seem to be going to a bad place. The condo market in the GTA is just absolutely dead. There's a very good chance we're going to a recession. So there's a good chance we are headed towards a lower price, but also a lower interest rate environment just because of general economic weakness. But again, my concern about that is that those periods of weakness set up the next boom, where you have a period where not much gets built, interest rates are low, the economy is bad. That persists for a while. Then the economy improves, interest rates are still relatively low. And there's so much pent up demographic demand of, people living in their parents' basement or whatever, that eventually once that switch flips, things are going to, go, just kind of stratospheric. And that's the experience we've had over the last, say, 40 to 50 years. My fear is that's going to happen again. I just, what I don't know, because I don't have a crystal ball, is, is that 2026? Is that 2029? I really don't know. And again, trying to time the market is kind of a fool's game. So I kind of agree with Cara. If you find something you like and you can afford it, I wouldn't gamble. Just take it.
I'd be very careful over leveraging yourself. That's one thing we've seen over the last few years of people worrying it's going to go out of reach and putting, 5% down on something. So they end up with huge mortgages. And I think that one thing to consider is, if Mike is wrong and there's actually a decrease in prices, if we see a crash at some point, can you afford to keep living in your home? So I would say that make sure that if you do find somewhere you love, that you can actually weather any storms for a while.
Thanks, everyone, for your great questions. I've got a couple of my own. So to Mike, I'd love to know why economists are so mean to each other on Twitter. And are you and Andrew Leach friends?
That's a great question. So the short answer is it's not just Twitter. We're like this in real life. Yeah, I mean it's a problem in the profession. There is a lot of it attracts very smart people with low levels of social skill to begin with, and especially at some of the higher more technical institutions like grad seminars can be very nasty places, right, where people kind of show off how smart they are and ask devastating questions. And I'm having flashbacks from my time as a PhD student at the University of Rochester. Just some of our grad seminars were like basically intellectual knife fights. So it's a problem. I think it's getting better. I think it's better than it was 25 years ago. But the culture can absolutely be toxic, and Andrew Leach is one of those people. He is like me, an economist.
Wait, so are you friends?
It's like, well, are we allowed to plead the fifth in Canada? Is that a thing? We are what we are. I don't know. Go ask Andrew. And I want him to give the answer first, and then I can respond.
Okay. I have to say, I thought journalists were bad, but when you look at economists,
you are.
Social,
you are.
I think economists are way meaner to each other than even journalists are. So I think we're more mean to each other, in the newsroom. And you guys are like, you're the dumbest person I ever met.
Publicly.
I get the sense that you guys are passive aggressive. We're just aggressive.
I do appreciate and respect that, frankly. So the question I had for Cara involved me wearing a sweater that she knitted for me. And this one she did not knit for me. So the question is, Cara, what's your secret talent?
Oh God, I don't know what to answer for that.
Okay, so I'm just going to do some bragging for Cara here, which is that she has many, many talents. Not only is she an amazing podcast host and a tenacious journalist, but she also is an incredible knitter, and she can create garments from string into fully formed outfits.
I do knit a lot. I've spent way too much time knitting. So at this point, I'm like, I can knit during meetings and stuff because I don't need to look at it. I can knit I could basically knit a sweater with my eyes closed at this point.
So basically, she's always doing more than one thing. So she's probably knitting something right now.
I actually am not. I haven't while taping. Maybe I should. Maybe that'll calm me down and get me to be better. I don't know. Or maybe we'll have to find out one day.
I'm going to really miss you. So I think this is our last recording before you go off on your mat leave. And I want you to have a wonderful time. And I want to say that it's been an incredible run over the last year doing this with you. And we're really going to miss you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're going to miss you and come back soon. Not too soon, but come back.
I'm sure you guys will still hear my raging about things all the time in between now and then because I don't know how to turn it off.
WhatsApp is still going to be functional, so we know we'll hear from you.
Thank you so much for watching and listening.
And if you have any thoughts or questions about economics graduate seminars, please send us an email to missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
Happy New Year!